Hey, everybody. Welcome to what we are continuing to call Split the Party. And I'm Monte Cook.
And I'm
with me
Darcy
is
Ross. And this is a casual hangout, which is why it's
yes,
okay if we're not perfectly scripted. Uh,
totally unscripted, in fact.
yes.
How are you doing, Darcy?
I'm doing pretty well actually. I've had a pretty okay week, and pretty okay is a big win these days. And I just got a fancy new ring light. I'm very excited. Please, ooh and ah, this minor lighting difference that I'm very excited about. So that's my
Cool.
big news. How are you doing?
Well, my friend Jeff Quick said in a chat we were having the other day, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm about a 4. But during a pandemic, you're not allowed to use numbers 6 through 10, so 4 is pretty good.
hmm Yeah, I like that. Let's. Oh my gosh, I really enjoy that. Finding new standards and new metrics for success has
Right.
been very important.
I
Hello,
feel like,
everybody in chat. Thanks for joining us.
yeah, hi everybody.
Chewy's here, gonna knock over my stuff, so get excited.
Cool. It would not be a stream video from Darcy if Chewy didn't make an
It
appearance at
really
least.
wouldn't, The fans demand him, and who is he to disappoint? Yeah, I think I would love from chat, anyone who's hanging around, I would love like recommendations of stuff that you've been enjoying or updates from you. How are all of you doing this week? Let us know and we'll watch and chat. And we'd love to know how our awesome community is doing in these times.
Yeah. So let's start off by talking about what MCG is up to. Um, I think that the last time we did one of these, we talked about how we were gonna take a little bit of time off,
hmm
just because our printer was not open and our warehouse was not open, and none of the distributors were open. But that's all opening up, and so MCG is back to work, and we're getting ready to send We Are All Mad Here off to the printer really soon. The layout's all done. I think it's got some last proofing stuff to do, but it looks great. It's going to be a really cool book. Personally, I'm putting some of the finishing touches on Godforsaken, so that will be out later in the year. We've also got let's see, so Liminal Shore,
hmm
which is like as we speak, sort of.
Yeah, the beautiful art behind us, the overlay is from Federico Musetti. Incredible liminal shore art that took my breath away when I was looking for new art to put on this. So,
Yeah, he's amazing.
and it's going to be a really cool book from what little gleanings I've had so far. Oh, here's
Yeah.
Chewy. Good. Ooh. Yeah. Do you want to give the pitch to We Are All Mad Here for people who might not remember?
Oh, sure. So this is a standalone Cypher system book. It kind of, in the same way that Stars Are Fire and Stay Alive kind of served two purposes. This will as well. It's our general book on running Cypher system games with a fantasy, rather a fairy tale sort of setting, and it's written by Shauna Germain. And it also has its own standalone setting that you can just pick up and use. And the cool thing is that Shauna took the title "We Are All Mad Here," which is of course a line from Alice in Wonderland, and she really focused in on the mad part. And playing off of that, she's done a really interesting thing in also having a major discussion about handling mental health issues in role playing games, handling them with accurately and with sensitivity, and
Mm-hmm.
both if there is someone in your game group who has an issue, or portraying someone in your game. And there's Chewy's butt.
Yep. You're welcome, everybody. There it is. We can all go home now. We got it. um, but also
Yeah, so
portrayals.
portraying a character with mental health issues or anything like that. And in fact, the core setting kind of embraces that whole concept quite a bit in interesting ways. Mm-hmm. So we're very proud of this book. I don't think there's anything really like it out there. And we hope everyone likes it.
Yeah, I'm excited. And then, of course, I got to playtest a little bit of Godforsaken, one of the Cypher shorts from it, which was a blast this week. So really fun. And, of course, Godforsaken is the supplement in that line of the Stars of Fire, Stay Alive. And we are all mad here that gives you lots of tools and rules for sort of a fantasy gaming, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, I think you did very well by yourself playing a goblin named Bric-a-Brac.
Bric-a-Brac. Oh man, we had a goblin and a griffin and an ogre, all in unusual circumstances joining forces to make our way through this scary dungeon against the dangers of the dungeon itself as well as adventurers, and it was really a blast. So I can't wait for that to come out.
Yeah, that's just one of the short, the Cypher short adventures. That where in that one you happen to play monsters, but there are other sort of more traditional ones as well. And then, like We Are All Mad here, it has its own default setting and some more longer full adventures as well. So lots of stuff to use in there, as well as just lots of guidelines for running fantasy games in general, and some interesting new magical options for a Cypher system if you really want to kind of delve deeper into that. Some of it, I will say, a little bit influenced by Invisible Sun. So
Ooh, that should make people excited. There's a lot of deep Invisible Sun fans, even those who I know in the chat. Thank you, Chewy. Chewy's a big fan of the cube. He likes to get in it and on it and around it and to lay on all of the bits. So I'm going to see if I can convince him to enjoy himself elsewhere. But my big news of things that are a little less far off is, let us see here. Voices of the Datasphere just came in. They just arrived in our warehouse, which is very exciting. And so it'll be going out to backers and pre-orders, and it's gorgeous.
It is. It really is. I'm so happy with the way it looks. I kind of had a vision for how I wanted the book to look, and it's way better.
Oh man, it's really beautiful. Very like bisexual coloration here in the pink and blue and purple. So I dig that. I like that it came with a glossary because there's it's a whole new. I think that I haven't gotten to read it yet properly, but I think that embraces the way that this is really going to be. Just a new layer of exploring the ninth world, right? It's a new way, it's a new, method of existence, but it's still embedded within your existing Numenera campaigns. It can still just sort of modularize right onto your game. So I'm very excited. Your data form is what happens when you sort of write yourself into the data sphere. Very excited.
Yeah, we would be lying if we didn't say that book was heavily influenced by Tron.
Heck yeah, good.
Yeah, kind of fully formed, going into the data sphere and taking on a form within the data sphere and moving around and doing things, and of course encountering obstacles and weird, horrible creatures from ancient days. And
yeah, Tron, but weirder. By several layers. I've only seen the Tron remake myself. As you know, I'm, my character flaw is that I have seen very little proper nerd media. But the perk of that flaw is that I get to have people tell me what cool classic nerd media is worth watching today. So I take the shortcut.
Tron is a lovable movie. It's it shows its age by a fair bit nowadays. I mean, it's a movie about going into a computer back when people didn't really have computers, right?
Right.
So it's uh, it's quaint, it's fun. I liked the sequel, reboot, remake
Hmm.
thing. Whatever you want to call that. I liked it quite a bit, but I know
Hmm.
that it got sort of mixed reception from other people.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. The soundtrack, as Sean Reynolds, who's in chat, is saying, super rocks. I think he's
Oh yeah,
talking
it is
about the new
great.
soundtrack, but maybe both.
Yes.
Oh,
No, the new
it's so
soundtrack.
good.
Right. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. Uh, we Sean says both soundtracks he
Oh,
used writing this. So, Voices of the Datasphere has its roots in both, I guess. There's a question about from Zeal Zaddy, who's one of our streamer friends who operates out of the wonderful Davie, Florida game store called the Adventure Game Store.
mm,
Big pals of MCG, good people down there. Zeal Zaddy is asking whether we are all mad here sticks to like fairy tales of the classic era, or there's sort of like more modern takes on it. I know Shauna drew from really all kinds of different traditions and folktale and myth.
yeah.
Um,
The short answer is both.
okay.
It does both. I mean, Shauna has a really deep knowledge of fairy tales. In my knowledge, kind of is like, Red Riding Hood and Cinderella and,
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of things. And her not, she will just rattle off all of these fairy tales that I just never even heard of.
Yeah.
And so it kind of encapsulates both of those things, but also, the sort of more modern things like Fables, the comic book, and the
Mm-hmm.
TV show Once Upon a Time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And things like that. And then plus, she also throws in, not heavily, but a little bit, kind of the sort of more modern urban legends,
Oh, fun.
internet weirdnesses and things like that, but
Cool.
just kind of in passing.
Yeah, a nod to
Those are
it.
really kind of our modern day fairy tales in a way.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Fairy tales in the
Creepy
making.
pasta.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's all my big MCG news that I had to get off my chest. Showing this off. Oh, this is actually a different thing I'm showing off. Arcana of the Ancients. So
You can show off that.
I just got this too. So by just got, I mean like properly unearthed as I reorganized all my books. So I got it and was like, oh my gosh, I get to read this now. So this is Arcana of the Ancients, are taking the weird of Numenera to 5e, which is very exciting for a lot of people. I know, like, for all of Numenera's existence, I think folks were like, but my players won't play anything but 5e. And
Right.
so this is finally an answer to that. And it's got lots of its own things going on. I was breezing through it a little earlier today, and there's sort of mechanically, is what I really want to dig into. Is like, okay, I love the mechanics of the Cypher system, so I'm eager to dig in and see more about how that gets translated to 5e. So.
Yeah, it isn't quite so much, just to set expectations. It
Mm-hmm.
isn't quite so much like a Cypher to D&D conversion as
Right.
it is the concepts of Numenera, ancient
Mm-hmm.
technology, ancient civilizations, uh, and weirdness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And putting that into 5e, and it's got a lot of adventures. And it's I think it's a very usable book, like sort of right out of the gate. You
Yeah.
can pick it up, and in fact, what we decided to do to make it more usable in that way is it starts out with sort of the introductory adventure that like is just a straightforward 5e adventure,
Mm-hmm.
and there's goblins, and it's just kind of seems very straightforward, and then of course everything gets weird.
Yeah. Yeah, it really surprised me when I opened that. It's a strong start to just be like adventure. Dive in with both feet. You as the GM and the players are going to sort of unearth the weirdness of ancient pasts as you go, including all the sort of mechanical and bestiary know-how that comes in here later.
Right.
It's a thick book too. is chonky.
That's a big one. Yeah, yeah. The team's worked on now a couple of the follow-up products as well, and those are all in various stages of getting ready. There's Beneath the Monolith, which takes literally the Ninth World setting from Numenera and represents it as though here's a 5e setting called the Ninth World. And so you can just, play from the get-go using all that stuff. And Beasts of Flesh and Steel is the bestiary, and we're pulling that all together. And I think it's still in editing.
Yeah, one of the things we heard about it recently, or that I heard about it, was just getting page counts versus the monsters, right? Like, so much of, Numenera's bestiaries and everything, like, are big, beautiful, splashy pieces of art of all these wild creatures. And, like, this is no different, right? So, and some of those, take up a lot of physical space, right? So that plus all the, like, everything you need for 5e is a little, like, longer winded, right? You need the full stat write up for everything. So it is an even chunkier book than it would be in Cypher, because we're not going to compromise on these enormous splashy pieces of art, but also you need everything for 5e. So I'm excited to see it.
That is exactly true. At one point we tried to keep the whole one monster, one guess
page.
It's 5e, so it's one monster per page. But it was requiring us to shrink this amazing art down so small. We were like, no, we can't do that. Yeah. And so some of them got expanded to not all of them, but the ones that deserved it. Right?
Awesome. Yeah, we got some folks excited for the setting book, Beneath the Monolith. So we're excited too. I know that Monte, it's got to be wild designing kind of concurrently in two different systems, back and forth all over the place, right? Cypher and 5e these days. And gosh, not very long ago, in your Invisible Sun supplements too.
And Invisible Sun and
right.
Game which will go unnamed right now.
Yes.
So yeah, it's actually 4.
Oh my gosh.
4 different.
Ouch. Rule sets.
And that's that's not counting all the games that I just like to pick up and read and sometimes get a chance to play beyond that too. So a lot of rule systems, to memorize.
I just played. I'd be curious what you've tended to pick up and read lately, but I've gotten to game a little more lately. I think just because I can now kind of pick up and game. Everybody's at home and they're not going out at night. And so to some degree, there's an ease in my ability to kind of schedule little one-shots with folks.
Sure.
So I've recently gotten to play a little bit of Night's Black Agents, which is Gumshoe. And it's supposed to be kind of like Bourne trilogy, like Super Spies.
You said Bourne with a B, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Born, yes. B as in boy. Yes. The other one's longer than a trilogy. Don't worry. It's a whole world of content out there. Subject of a different split the party, I suspect. But instead of playing Super Spies, my roommate John has a real soft spot for like crime procedurals, specifically Criminal Minds. So we're sort of repurposing that to be kind of a FBI agents in a kind of serial killer profiling unit. So I'm playing that, and then on a very different side of things, I got to play Fall of Magic, which is that game that comes in the beautiful tapestry rolled up. It's by the Heart of the Deernicorn games, which are fantastic folks out near you. I think they're in Olympia, and they screen print these incredible products and this enormous scroll too. And it's very like, everything you need to play, like all the rules are, there's not very many of them, right? It's sort of, pick these characters, you're one of these names from this place. And there's just kind of narrative prompts. And so you're having these little scenes around, the pitch is that magic is dying and the magus is sort of dying with it. And so you're going on a journey with this magic user of some sort, and you're traveling to the Umbra for reasons. And so you sort of start out at your citadel, your home, and then you set out on a long, fantastical journey. And it was very beautiful and meditative, and I thought it was really lovely. It seemed really nice for like pick up and put down kind of play. So I think I've been looking for more games that I can play with very small groups, because sometimes I can just, sometimes John and I just want to play, or, I just want to play with one friend across the internet. So I feel like Fall of Magic works really well if you're looking for like a small group play as well.
That makes a lot of sense. I've read it and oohed and awed over the scroll, but I haven't. I've actually played it. I'm acquainted with the designer though. He's a good guy, and he's an Invisible Sun fan.
Yeah,
and, running an Invisible Sun, or he was before.
Yeah.
Isolation. I think that sounds really great. And it's really good to know that it's a good 2-person game.
Yeah.
It's also of interest to me.
Yeah. And it's available on Roll20 as well, which is really neat. I think the physical product is a lot of the fun, but if some gaming, digital gaming is better than no gaming at all, I think. And so check it out on Roll20.
Yeah.
Rule of Lore is asking a question about your sort of dabbling across so many different systems. Is there, I imagine there's many challenges if you want to pull out one to name, but are there any like perks or kind of something rewarding about working in different systems, or is there a silver lining anywhere in that?
Well, yes, right. I'm a firm believer in. Yeah, this sounds weird as someone who created the Cypher system, in which you can do anything, right? But I'm a firm believer that there is room for multiple game systems, sort of in the world, and they serve different needs and different purposes, and they kind of fit with different gamers at different times. And so I think that it's kind of like. It's like going to a buffet, right? You can kind of get a little, with a bunch of different game systems, you can kind of enjoy this meal here because you're, that's the mood you're in. But tomorrow you might be in this mood, or maybe even just later this afternoon you might be in that mood, or whatever, right? And so that's very rewarding. And I don't know, from a game design point of view, it feels very rich. It feels very full to keep all these things in mind. And it means that sometimes, I'll say, something is a task when it's actually a challenge, or, whatever, the terminology will get screwed up, right? I think in the game that I played with you yesterday, I think I said reflex save at one point when I meant speed defense roll, and that just happens. And it's always happened to me. Like even when we did 3rd edition D&D, not only, was like 2nd edition and 1st edition D&D still in my mind, but there were so many different iterations of 3rd edition that once I would sit down to play even the finished one, I would be like, okay, so I remember us in the meeting talking about how that worked, and we had 3 different ideas. Which one did we actually decide on, right?
Yeah, probably all valid, right?
Right. And so, I ended up being the person having to look the most rules up in my game group for 3rd edition, right? Because I couldn't remember which, way we'd gone with the grapple rules or whatever.
Yeah. What timeline are we in the possible timelines of 3rd edition? You've sort of touched them all.
Yeah. I think initiative is probably the thing that went through the most iterations in that game. And, it's just so many different versions.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, so weirdly, I think with the pandemic, I'm
Yeah.
probably gaming more now, and it kind of
Mm.
sounds like you are
A
too,
little bit. Yeah.
which is really interesting. I think it's just because we sort of don't have as many other outlets for socialization and fun and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, I think that, I know that like sometimes it's fun to just get on Zoom or whatever and chat with your friends, but sometimes I don't know, having a game actually, I don't know, it's the social lubricant, right? It kind of gives you all something to focus on and enjoy together.
Yeah. And you know, I think I've definitely felt in I don't know, I think one of the perks too is that it gives me a structure where I can lean into it. It's sort of a comforting structure too, compared to like a Zoom call where we're all having a discussion, right? Like I got on a Zoom call with the 7 women I lived with in college and recently. And so it was like a big, where are you all at? What's going on? How are you doing? Where are you holed up in quarantine? And it was very good and important, and I'm glad I did it. But it was very draining. And I feel like if we had all been playing a game, right, there's something about like sinking into a known format, right, as opposed to being like constantly like, should I talk now? What should we be saying? There's a little, that structure, I think, makes that
Yeah.
social activity just feel a little less like, I don't know, analysis paralysis, right? Like there are certain kinds of decisions I have to make as opposed to the infinite decisions that I can make in a normal human conversation. And so I think that like it drains me a little differently.
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's the structure, right? In a
Yeah.
role-playing game, at least to some extent, right? You know when it's your turn to talk
Right.
and when it's someone else's turn to talk, right?
Initiative might have told you, for instance, right?
Yeah, right. We should roll for initiative in real conversations on Zoom, right?
I'm specialized. Get it in there. Yeah. Oh, that's really funny.
I also think that like if you're talking about a group of like 8, like you're talking about there,
Yeah.
like if you met with 7 other people in person, you actually probably wouldn't spend a ton of time interfacing with all of them at once, right? There'd be sort
You'd
of more
split.
small groups. But when you do a Zoom call or whatever platform you're using, right? It's everyone is, all other 7 faces are looking at you. And if someone says, you feel like you've got to pay attention to what everyone is saying rather
Yeah.
than being able to split off into have a one-on-one for 5 minutes with somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's all kinds of weird studies that are going to come out of this time, right, about how people communicate and how it really, all the different ways that it might be functionally different when we're Zoom chatting versus hanging out in a room. Um, yeah, I don't have anything smart to say about that. I hope smarter people will come to me with smart insights about that.
So I'm going to steer our conversation then.
Yes, take initiative.
A direction that just something that I've been thinking a lot about. It's a topic that gets talked about in Your Best Game Ever quite a bit, but I've kind of gone a lot further down that road and since then. And it's the idea of narrative control, right? And by that, what I mean is, who, when you get to the, big treasure room and there's the treasure chest and you open up the treasure chest, who decides what's in there, right?
Yeah.
The traditional way, obviously, is that the GM does that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, goes back from early days when there were people who sort of espoused the idea that back then it would have been just dungeon master, right? The dungeon master is God and decides all of those things, right? And you just sort of play in their world. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's cool. But I think nowadays, in the last, especially maybe 10, 15 years, we've really sort of seen other ways to do that, right? With the players having more input. We've seen a lot of games like that. And I think that that's really interesting. And I think the reason that it's interesting is because I think that narrative control and immersion are two sort of forces that kind of, in a weird way, kind of butt up against each other for at least for a lot of people. And you know, when you have more of one, you kind of have less of the other sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it behooves the group to kind of have a discussion about that and how people feel about that, because there are some people who are like, you know, I really want to get into this world. I want to feel like it's a real place. I want to, you know, have my character think about, you know, or think about what my character is going to do in this world and react to things. And if you suddenly give me any kind of narrative control beyond my own character, I lose that, right? It suddenly doesn't feel like I'm a real person in a real world anymore, because I get to decide the NPC name, right? Because I don't get to do that in real life.
Yeah.
But you know, the flip side is taking that responsibility off of the GM is really kind of nice, but it also injects another or multiple other voices and ideas and brains into the story that you're creating together. And, you know, we could all use sort of an injection of an outside voice.
Yeah.
Kind of come in and add some stuff that we never would have thought of. Right.
Right. And, you know, I think the control that players have, even in the Dungeon Master is God, you know, side of the slider, is, you know, is their actions, right? What do they choose to do? And I think one of the great delights that I first learned when I started jamming is players will do things you didn't expect, right? And that is absolutely one of the most fun part. I identified that early as one of the most fun parts for me is, what are they going to do? And I think my obsession with that mystery, even as a GM's side of things, is why I have found myself enjoying leaning more into having my players have more narrative control, because I'm hungry for that, their input. I'm hungry for the like the creative like seed of someone coming up with an idea that I wouldn't have come up with, and finding the way to weave it into what I've already had planned. But I, you know, I feel like I go back and forth on this, in part because different genres, I feel like, can lend themselves differently to this, or you need certain mechanical frameworks for it to work better in different genres. And so what I mean by that is like mysteries, right? To some extent, if we're playing certain, you know, there are RPGs that have been designed around mysteries that are, you know, asking the GM to really have clear what the details of their mystery are and what the key clues of that might be. Like Gumshoe asks you to do that. And then there are games like, I'm totally blanking on one of the great ones I've played that is very much about building the adventure collaboratively as you go, right? Building what the mystery is. And we just sort of follow, you know, that works really well for zany things, right? Because you can kind of mash anything into a zany Scooby-Doo style mystery, right? You can smash it all in. It doesn't need to have, you know, beautiful, nuanced, perfected little clues draped across a landscape for you. So.
No, that's a really good insight, because I have experienced that myself, that the more narrative control that when I'm running a game, the more narrative control that I give to the players, I would say the more likely we're going to end up with something a little zany.
Yeah, right.
Happens. And wow, I'm a huge fan of zany. Don't get me wrong. But it would be interesting to think about the things that you would have to do if that wasn't your desired outcome, right? We're going to play, you know, dark horror game here, but we're still going to kind of build it collaboratively to some degree, right? I mean, it's harder to do that probably not only like in a mystery game, but also in a horror game, right? Because what do we fear the most? And that's the unknown. And so that's interesting. But I have found that giving people some input into what scares them the most, does sort of really kind of play well with horror.
Do you have any examples of how you've brought that into your tables, or?
Well, so yeah, in a long time ago, I ran a Call of Cthulhu game, and at one point between sessions, I specifically asked everybody, what does their character, what's their character's greatest fear, what's the traumatic experience that they've had in the past or whatever. And, we got some good character development out of that, and then used that in like scary dreams that they got from Cthulhu or whatever. I don't actually remember the scenario. But then I took it a step further, and later on I contacted them all again between sessions, and I said, okay, now I don't want to know what scares your character. I want to know what scares you.
Ooh,
right? What gets under your skin? Within obvious boundaries. And the nice thing is that if I'm asking you that, you're not going to tell me something that you don't want me to know. Right.
Yeah.
And so you're
what scares you in a fun way that you want to share?
Yeah.
And would
and,
like
and,
to
and that's almost kind of unspoken. I mean, that's a good thing to talk about, right? To, know boundaries and stuff, especially with horror gaming. But the nice thing is that it's coming from you. And so you're going to tell me, oh, spiders really creep me out, or whatever your thing is. And, that's the kind of thing where, like, I mean, there are people who get really seriously, like, freaked out by spiders, but they're not going to tell you that, right? They're not gonna give you the keys to that car,
right?
Right. They're gonna tell you something else, and so that worked out really well, and I was able to use that, sparingly, in a game and in the game as it went on, and that was also really fun. And it was also fun to have people start thinking about the differences between what scares their character and what scares them.
Yeah.
And what those differences are and why, those are good character building moments, I think.
Yeah. I would love the dread as a player of wondering when/if you're going to pepper that into the campaign too, right? Like, what a fun player foreshadowing moment, right? You're sort of the player is waiting for that spooky shoe to drop, and who knows when it's going to come up. So they're I feel like my internal thought process would be a lot about, like, looking for that super scary thing that I told you about and waiting for it, and that sort of builds that anticipation as well. That's really
and I think it worked out so that not everybody's came into play in the game. And I think the people for whom that it didn't come into play, for exactly the reasons that you just say, that was just as effective for them. Right. If you think something is coming, that's just as scary as if it's actually coming.
Yeah, the jump scares that never come, but are right around the corner.
But you can hear that music playing, right? You know it's coming.
Oh man. Someone is giving a quote from Twitter. I'm not sure where. Randall J. Hen, let me know where you found that. But the quote is, "The GM decides the details of the heist, but the players decide whether the theme music is Pink Panther or Benny Hill." I really like that, right? Players shaping tone so much. I was thinking about, Fall of Magic reminds me of Invisible Sun because it was built so intentionally in terms of the physical product, in terms of the language and the shape of the box it came in, right? It's all pointing toward a very specific kind of mood. There's lots of, these beautiful coins that you can key off of, the details on the coins. And they all kind of construct the specific mood of Fall of Magic that makes it feel like a Fall of Magic game more than any old fantasy quest, right?
Right.
And I think Invisible Sun does that really well with, the shape of the box and the six-fingered hand, but especially the Sooth cards, right? There's so much of the symbology and the mood of the game built into those cards, and pointing back toward that specific sort of fragrance of Invisible Sun that we all sort of keep aligned with. And I was thinking about when I ran A Woman with Hollow Eyes for the One Shot Network, once or twice I couldn't make a session, and the players kind of just did development mode scenes using the Sooth deck, just kind of riffed off of it, just played without me. And, we sort of reserved the right to call them, canon or not canon afterwards. And some of them did exactly what we're talking about. They got really zany because it's just, players, a bunch of improvisers in Chicago with no one to corral them, just riffing and having a blast. Great fun, great content. It's very zany. But I think there were some sort of, darker, more emotionally vulnerable, slower, more occult development mode sessions that came out of that too. And I think that absolutely came from, very skilled role players who were a part of that cast. So they, absolutely rocked it. But I think one thing that helped keep it in that specific vein was the fact that they were using these cards that's constantly reminding them of, ravens and books and cats, and, the symbology kind of anchors them in a way. And so I've been thinking a lot about, how to engineer atmosphere and tone for your game. And I think a lot of it helps, visuals and sound and tactile things really anchor me in a mood and remind me to get back to that same atmosphere in between sessions, right? So I think,
Right.
One thing I've been trying to think about, John really does a lot of Pinterest boards, and I think you use them too for some
Yeah.
creative mapping. Like, I think as we all move to a lot of online gaming, I've been trying to think about ways that I can get at that feeling too. And I haven't, a lot of my gaming hasn't been on Roll20, which usually has like a virtual tabletop that I could put art up on. But there's got to be other ways that I can kind of evoke that, but I haven't cracked that nut yet. When you play online, are you just in a pure Zoom? Do you have any like shared documentation that you sort of have among your players?
Well, lately, most of the online gaming that I've been doing has been very, we'll just say very improv heavy.
Right.
And so it would be difficult to have a lot of things ahead of time to have ready for display or whatever. However, I do think that something that I feel like it gets a little underutilized, and I've definitely done this, is to somehow arrange it. And, it's not that difficult, right? To just have like an extra webcam, right? Or whatever, an extra feed that's going into your gaming chat, right? So if you've got 5 players, you've actually got 6 windows, and that 6th window is for, here's this cool piece of art that I found on Pinterest or whatever, right? Here's the inscription of the old curse that you find on the side of the tomb. And honestly, I'm of the belief that even if you have just one thing like that in a session, and you just kind of leave it up there, it is a mood setter, right? And I think that that it's not hard to do, and it's really valuable. Even if it's, here's a picture of a character, and that character is only kind of on screen for 5 minutes out of the 3-hour session. I don't know. It's an anchor.
Yeah.
It reminds you that you're in a fantasy world or whatever genre you're in.
Yeah, I know that in the last Tallest chat, that the Tallest live video that we did with Andy Collins and Jesse Decker,
Mm-hmm.
and Bruce and Sean and Monty talking about the original Tallest campaign in the days of 3E, when they were all hanging out and designing Dungeons and Dragons. One of the things they brought up was talking about some of the, the cool dungeon, not maps, but the like
Well, I had a lot of terrain.
terrain. Thank you.
And I was very heavy into painting miniatures and kind of cobbling together weird things, and sometimes action figures would get used for really big horrible monsters. And it was a very visual game. Tallest was.
Yeah, that's awesome. I had a question. I'm taking initiative and steering the conversation a little, but I had a question about narrative control, and oh gosh, I've done it. I said it's a question, and it's more like a statement. The worst sin I can make. Anyway, I was thinking about narrative control from earlier today, and one of the things I really love about ways that the Cypher system plays with who gets and who shares in narrative control is like GM intrusions, because it's a theoretically it's the GM sort of inserting, making a hard move, sort of inserting something cool and new, some cool new weird element to the story, but it's also a question, right? It's a I'm intruding upon you, but you have the power to say no or to shape that in some way by refusing my GM intrusion with a spend of XP. I've always loved that deeply, and I did peek to see whether Arcana of the Ancients would allude at all to this, because GM intrusions is something I've absolutely stolen wholesale from Cypher and brought into every 5e game I've played since, and 2e games I've played since, right? It's just part of my toolkit everywhere now. And I did see that there's a little bit of advice on if you want to bring GM intrusions to 5e and specifically to Arcana of the Ancients. I really liked that you included that in here as sort of a module that I think many of us Cypher fans are looking for as we're, playing 5e.
I'll be honest, that is almost entirely because of the playtesters.
Really?
Playtesters asked for that.
Wild.
And so if we got so many requests for it, it seemed like a silly thing to not at least address.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
So yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, it's just the other thing I would love to hear you talk about is, something that's new in Numenera Discovery and Destiny is player intrusions.
Right.
I don't know if I've ever really heard you talk about the design story behind, why those got included.
It's exactly what we're talking about, right? It's giving a tiny bit of narrative control. We have said from the beginning that Numenera was a game about joint, group storytelling, right? And the goal is to tell a great story, and player intrusions are, whereas GM intrusions are, okay, I don't roll dice. None of this stuff that's happening to you is random because we're trying to create a great story here.
Mm-hmm.
But I still have the power to say, the rope, the rope that you're dangling from, it's starting to fray. What do you do, right? I always like to point out, like I can't now watch movies without thinking in terms of GM intrusions, right? Like, that GM's a dick.
What did Monty do to you today?
That's like the third
what did the director do to you?
In this one scene.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. But if that's what GM intrusions are, player intrusions are when the player is sitting at the table and the story is being told by the group, and the player says, I have a cool idea, right? And I mean, yes, it can be to benefit the success of the play of the characters or whatever, but the real intention is more the success of the game. And so players can do player intrusions, like basically, hey, wouldn't it be cool if my character already knew that guy and we have this history or whatever. it was one of those things where when we did the original Numenera back in 2011, and I was playtesting GM intrusions, the natural thing that people would ask is, well, what about player intrusions? And I rejected the idea then, because I had hoped that Numenera was the kind of game where players have a lot of control, but it's all within their own character, right? Like they're using effort or whatnot. You get to decide
XP for rerolls, right?
Right. You get to decide. You have a lot of control over your character, arguably more than a kind of a standard D&D type game, because you get to decide sort of when you're going to try really hard.
Yeah.
And I thought that was enough, but years of playing additionally on that showed me that I think that it's just a good idea, and I actually don't see them get used a lot, but pretty much every time they do get used, it makes the game better, right? It kind of it brightens things somehow. It kind of injects a new layer of interest and fun. And the other thing is that, like, it's a great way to show the GM that you are really invested. Right? Like, oh, my character has been here before, and I know that there's a secret stash of ciphers hidden behind the bar in this tavern or whatever. That suddenly now that player has just contributed to the world, right? And it shows, we're all more likely to be more invested in a setting if we've had a little bit of say in it, right? A little bit, I've put my fingerprint on it.
Yeah, absolutely. What you said is making me think of, I'm not sure why exactly, but I'm thinking a lot about the messages GMs get from their players by actions the players take, right? And I think a lot of the fun I have GMing is thinking about a session afterward and kind of trying to deconstruct what was working and what wasn't working as well, and trying to think about, like, why that player latched onto that NPC or why that player was more quiet this session. I think there's a lot of kind of like psychological deconstructing that I try to do as a GM, probably sometimes with success and sometimes not as much, but right. I'm constantly trying to read my players and understand what they're engaging with and what they aren't. So it was making me think what a fun experiment it might be to, like, play a session of something sometime, and then afterwards as a team sort of go through and, everybody picks out moments where we're like, this is when Darcy really lit up, and I knew she was going to be into this because it's horrible and slimy, and look at how that totally worked. Or, when Darcy spent her XP this way, the conclusion I, the GM, have drawn from it is X, Y, or Z. Is that right? Is that wrong? I'm always looking to sharpen those skills, and maybe like a workshop like that might be fun for me to run, even just with friends, right?
Yeah, that would be very cool. It kind of is like, it's why I enjoy the character summaries in Invisible Sun sessions so much, right? Where at the end of the session, everyone kind of talks about what they, how their character felt about things, and how they reacted to things internally. Even if it didn't sort of get expressed at the table at the time, everyone's got sort of this rich life inside their own head, and hearing about that also then speaks to what you're saying, because clearly if something was meaningful to a character, almost by definition it was meaningful to the player too, right? Because the player is the one deciding that it was meaningful to the character.
Yeah.
I kind of want to take the idea of narrative control and even kind of explore it in a different way too. Like, so I've already sort of revealed that a lot of my game thinking comes from watching movies and then thinking about, okay, now how do I make that a game, right?
Yeah.
And so Shauna and I were watching John Wick not very long ago, or rewatching John Wick. And it occurred to me, and this is a slight spoiler, but not really. It occurred to me that what I was watching there was okay, sort of a one-on-one game, with one player, one GM, right? And so one guy is there, and he's made a character that is this badass assassin dude. And at some point, it's almost as though, like, once he John Wick decides to come back into the world of crime and killing people. It's as though the GM just turned to him and said, "Okay, so you're an assassin. You've been an assassin for a really long time. You know all the ins and outs. You know everybody in this world. And now you can't stay home. Where would a character like that go?" Right? Because I almost feel like it was the player who said, well, maybe there's this hotel, right, that is like neutral ground for all of us, and we can go there and we can be safe, and maybe it's run by some mysterious entities that are enforcing this moratorium on killing there and stuff. And I thought to myself, that's really great, and I want to play that game where the player actually introduces arguably what then becomes, like, if you've seen John Wick and John 2 and 3, right, like the big thing, right, the thing that sort of defines the John Wick world. And I find that really interesting, because I think so often the opposite happens. And I make a character and they're really experienced and good at all of these things, and I'm sort of constantly then having to ask the GM, well, would I know this, right? Would I know of a place to go? And to head that off, right, and just say, well, you'd probably know of a place to go. Where would that be, right?
It feels like such an extension of and celebration of John Wick, the character, right? Like that whole place, and I wish I'm gonna think about this a lot more, because I would love to find a way to port that into my games as well, right? And maybe it is just doable by asking the player, but it's so turned up to 11, like everything in John Wick, which I just recently saw all of, and my God, it's probably my favorite thing I've watched during Shelter in Place.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Just an absolute delight. My jaw was on the floor basically the whole time. They're great. And I don't know, there's something about the fantastical element of it, of just whole beautiful movies of like excellently choreographed violence. Like I am lucky to be in a life in which that does not describe my life at all. And so it doesn't remind me of anything. That's a bummer. It's just beautiful, high octane violence and fantastic hints of world building. It's great. So highly recommended. But yeah, I think that hotel absolutely is something the player concocted to maximally make them look cool and be a part of a cool world and have, it's just rule of cool for an entire location.
Yeah, it's almost like the player would have said, my character doesn't make a lick of sense unless something like this exists.
Yes. Very much. Oh, no.
Seem to be kind of freezing up a little bit. Are you back? Okay.
Sorry about that. Let's make sure the stream's still up. And it is. Sorry for any dropped frames, folks. I think we're still good. Yeah, that's a delight. Thank you.
Yeah, it's already getting late. But sometime we'll have to discuss, because of John Wick. It doesn't have anything to do with this narrative control, but Shauna and I had this really long, interesting conversation after rewatching John Wick about sort of how you create a character who is like John Wick, who just wantonly kills
Yeah, right.
so many people and yet is still a likable protagonist, right? And
yeah.
I mean, I know that we throw around words like anti-hero and stuff like that a lot. And I mean, you know, if I knew John Wick in real life, I would think he was a giant jerk off, right? Because you know, he's a horrible murderer hundreds of times over.
Yeah.
But you know, but as a character, we like to watch him a lot and we root for him because he's better than everyone else. And so it's interesting from a storytelling point of view, how do we establish that? Right. You know, obviously there's the dog and but there's also, you know, other characters where he clearly doesn't want to hurt certain people, right? And gives them a pass, right? But you know, God, it's such a fictionism that we have created. Here I'm having the conversation I didn't want to have, but but you know, that there is such a thing as like an ethical murderer, right? Like,
right.
You know, like Dexter, right? That show where, you know, oh yes, I'm a serial killer, but I only kill terrible people. And so somehow that makes me good. Right. But in our real lives, we would never be okay with that. But in our fiction, we're absolutely okay with that.
Yeah.
And you know, it totally applies to role-playing games, right? I mean, depending on what game you're playing, obviously, but if you're playing most role-playing games, characters have probably killed a whole bunch of people, right?
And you know, I think this could be the topic of a whole other conversation, because I think it's something I wrestle with sometimes, is like, you know, I think certain games or game setups, you know, or even like campaign setups deal with the setup of our sort of morals and the fiction and what we are buying into and what we aren't buying into differently. And I think sometimes, like, you know, I wish I could deconstruct it more eloquently, but I just know that in some games, like when I'm playing a character, I lean more into the pacifism if for some reason the kind of fiction of what we've all agreed to doesn't feel quite right, or, you know, I don't feel like the space has been carved out for me to absolutely turn my brain off and enjoy some senseless violence in certain games than in other setups, right? And and so I thought that's one of the things I struggle with sometimes when games are trying to be really realistic. Like one thing I've played with in like Delta Green, right, where you're playing like there's horrible Cthulhian monsters and it's maybe modern day and you're an FBI agent and you have to go maybe murder a bunch of people to keep the secret of the Cthulhu cultists, you know, secretive, right? You know, I think sometimes I've been in campaigns of like Delta Green where we were like going for extremely hard realism, like exactly how much C4 could you bring into that building? You know, so much like looking stuff up. And then it would be like hard for me to be like, okay, we've really leaned into realism and now I have to like kill a lot of random innocents. And I'm like, Darcy, I think I need more barriers between Darcy's real life and the fiction of the game we're playing for me to be able to like sort of sit with this fictional you know, murdering. But you know, sometimes I can be I'm an adventurer. I got a big weird club and I'm in a fantasy world and there's a bunch of like, you know, not very detailedly described you know, evil warthog people that have all signed a contract that have said that they're committed to evil and willing to put their life on the line to continue to do so. And unfortunately, we must meet in battle. And so now I can get into cool moves and stuff. I don't know. There's something. I think you're totally right that setup of the fiction is has a lot of power, and I think you can allude to it different ways. So I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, it's definitely something. I mean, it's definitely one of those things that in games, right, you can be very jarring if you have multiple players coming at that from different directions, right? You got somebody who just like kills an NPC without really thinking about it too much, and someone else who's just utterly horrified by the fact that that just happened, and maybe that's a cool scene, maybe that's a good interaction that you want to have, but it also suggests maybe they should have had this discussion before the game started.
I must shout out the consent checklist that's in Consent in Gaming. It's a really handy just framework for starting to have these conversations about what do we want in our game? What is the buy-in we think we're all getting up to in terms of content? And does it look vaguely similar between all the players? Awesome.
Yeah. One of the things that I loved, I ran an Invisible Sun game, an Invisible Sun narrative that I think it must have gone for 6 or 7 months before there was any like human person death like on stage, right?
Wow, cool.
Whether it was, whether the player, I don't think it was the PCs that did it, right? It was, but I mean, it was like we had achieved such interesting and intricate stories without just sort of resorting to, well, there's some bad guys, we better kill them.
Yeah.
And I'm very sort of proud of that. I think that's really cool. And, because there are so many different kinds of stories to tell, and you can make them very exciting without just sort of putting, guns or deadly spells or whatever in someone's hands and they can go at it.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything really, I mean, I just got done saying how much I like John Wick, and
yeah. Again, we're at the buffet of game experiences here.
Exactly.
And sometimes I'm in for a John Wick, and sometimes I want to just maybe find out if me and that cool lady in the library that I met are gonna have a date someday in Invisible Sun, Different strokes.
Cool. Is there any we could take one more question from chat?
Yeah, let me pull one up. There's oh no, I had to refresh. So there are a couple questions along the way, but they were deep in discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, someone was asking about, and I'm sorry I can't remember who. My one peppered question to add at the end would be, someone's asking about Godforsaken, which you're working on, and Talus, which you're thinking about converting to 5e and Cypher. I guess, do you have anything to say about like Godforsaken and how it might sit with Talus, or how it's informed by or rubbing up against Talus?
Yeah, well, that's a conversation that Sean Reynolds and I have had on a couple of different occasions, because he's worked with me on Godforsaken, and he's going to be working with me on the conversions. And what we want is, we don't want, if you get Talus and start playing Talus, we don't want you to have Godforsaken,
right?
But we want your experience in Talus to be better if you have Godforsaken, right? Like there's still a lot of added value. It's not just the same stuff reiterated twice. Mm-hmm. I think that it's not too hard. Like, certainly the sort of default fantasy setting that comes with Godforsaken, which is that's actually the name of the setting, is not at all Talus-like. And so there's you're getting two very different experiences there. That said, there's a lot of interesting creatures and like I was talking about before with some magical options. There's ritual magic and whatnot in Godforsaken and whatnot, and that could be ported in very fun ways over into Talus. So it's actually turning out to be very beneficial that because Sean is already going through Talus and starting to think through some of the conversion stuff that needs to happen, and so and I'm still working on Godforsaken, so it's very beneficial that these things are happening all at the same time.
Yeah. There's a lot of love in chat about both sort of grabby hands toward Tallis and Godforsaken. So
Cool.
I feel similarly. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a split the party.
That's a split the party. Thank you so much for joining us, chat folk. You're great. I think we might be sheltering in place longer, so we may do another one of these. I'd love to know what you'd like to hear about and how these are hitting you. So definitely let us know what you think. This will be up on YouTube pretty shortly, so look forward to that for especially folks who we maybe didn't catch your time zone. I understand that we're a world of gamers, and I apologize that we can't all line up very well in sync. But thanks to everyone who was able to be here live. Thank you, Monty, for
Thank you, Darcy.
joining me. This is super fun. Yeah, stay safe and healthy, everybody. Good luck with your gaming. And
have fun, everybody.
Yeah, bye.